everybody, I'm Kenneth and I'm going to teach you how I make pixel art templates and giant bead art. I'll have some shorter tutorials up on my page for advice and tricks I might not cover in this video, but right now I'm going to walk you through making this Bead Bakugou from start to finish. There are programs and websites that'll change your image into pixels for you that I'll talk about in another video, but this is the method I've used since I started making my own beading templates. Open up your image into a basic graphics editing program like Microsoft Paint. Make sure the edges of the image don't have any empty space in them because we're going to be resizing only the portions of the image we want to bead. What you'll want to do is find the resizing tool and change the method from percentage to pixels, which will give you the current measurement of your image. Each pixel is going to be one bead, so this is how you'll plan out the size of your project. Usually when I'm working on a giant piece, I want to maintain a decent amount of detail without breaking the bank on bead cost. Let's see how the image looks at half size. Very detailed, but in this case the size is still too big for my buyer, whose budget I'm going to need to work within. I'll talk about budgeting for projects in another video, but let's talk about choosing sizes. For giant projects like this one, I know I'm going to use my largest pegboard, which is 49 by 69 pixels. Here's what it would look like if I wanted to save a lot of time and money and just make it the size of one board. As you can see, the smaller the whole image gets, the more detail you lose. So what I'm going to do is experiment with the pixel count. Usually, I try to keep the numbers of one of the sides close to being multiples of either 49 or 69, nice, or to make it easier on my brain, 50 and 70. It helps me visualize the actual size of the piece as well. I can tell myself, this will be 3 boards tall and 2 boards wide, etc. Now I'll switch to my workspace. You can see here I've picked my size. The next step is to define the lines and make sure every color shade on the image is clear. For this I use the pencil tool, which colors in pixel by pixel, and simply trace over the lines that are already there. This helps out wherever the lines or colors look blurred or fuzzy, like with the small detail lines here. As I'm tracing, I'll use the color pick tool to make palette blocks off to the side of the colors I want to use for the project. These are the shades that I know for sure match up well with the bead colors I have. I'll also use this opportunity to change the shade of the colors that are on my template if I need to. For example, I know Bakugou's eyes are going to be red, but at this size they look a little muddy. I'll fix that now. When I'm defining colors like this, I'll often stop and go back to look at the original image if I feel unsure about changes I'm making. Here I notice that the original image doesn't use any other colors than cream for Bakugou's hair, so I'm probably not going to do that either. Side note, as you're making changes to your original image, it's a good idea to copy-paste it off to the side, so if you end up changing too much and make a mistake somewhere, you can go back and copy that portion of the original to start over without hitting undo a million times. In this version of Paint at least, the number of undos you can use is limited. One of the reasons I like using this method to pixelize images is it's given me a little bit of drawing practice. Often I'll have a reference picture that cuts off at an awkward area, so I like to see if I can draw in a little bit of what's missing to give the whole piece a more finished look. I did the same thing with my giant Bead Bakugou when some of the fingers were cut short. Now that I have my template drawn, I like to pre-map my panels. That is, I'm going to chop the image into sections that are each just small enough to fit on my board, which again is 49 by 69 pixels. I do this by using the rectangle draw tool, the line tool, the cutout tool, whatever works best for measuring out my pieces in the moment. And I either frame each piece out like this with a box that's 1 pixel larger on each side, or I cut the pieces apart and make gaps between them to show how the look's separated, which also helps me avoid accidentally beading an extra row or column on one of the pieces. Anytime you use lines, make sure it's a bright color that won't get lost in your image. Now it's time to bead. Now that I've gotten started, I flip the reference image so that later the first side I end up ironing is the back instead of the front. I don't use the tape method that I know is pretty popular with pro bead artists because I've had some trouble with it in the past, but I'll be sure to show you exactly how I do my ironing at the end of the video. You can bead whatever part of your image you want in whatever order you want, but I like drawing the lines of the image and then coloring them in. Though you have to be careful about not knocking any of the beads you've already placed off their pegs, I generally like the coloring method because I can drop handfuls of beads into the open space and kind of knock them around into their positions, which I'm realizing now might really bother some people with OCD issues. I'm sorry. You might also notice when you're beading that something in your image looks a little off. This is going to be almost exactly how the end product looks, so change what you want while you still have the chance. If you're worried about changing too much, just take a picture of what you have before you change anything. This is where I noticed it looked like Bakugou's eye creases were eyelashes. Every time I build a project, I keep my reference image open in Paint in case I'm having trouble counting the number of spaces I need between beads, especially when a line or color is hovering in the midst of a big open space. This way I can draw a quick dotted line for myself and count the spaces. By the way, if you're doing something like this, make sure to take a break at least once an hour to rest your eyes and drink some water, not coffee or soda like me. For real though, this is a serious strain on your eyes, so give them a break from beads and screens to avoid dryness, itching, headaches, migraines, insomnia, or just general burning and pain. As you can see, by now my original reference image has gone through a lot of measurements and edits with various note-taking and color corrections, and I'm usually still doing them all the way up through the end of the project, which is why I don't always have a neat and tidy template available. This last panel is full of areas where the colors blurred together when the image shrank down, but since I already know what shades of color I'm using, I can go through and darken the black lines and highlight the colored areas. Now comes the terrifying part. As I mentioned, I don't use the tape method to remove my beads from the board before ironing, and I do actually use the iron while the beads are still on it, just because I like the extra stability and being able to quickly fix beads if they get knocked out of place. For this side of the project, I use wax paper between the beads and the iron because of the way it sticks to the beads. I personally use a medium-high heat, and I always start at one edge, holding the edge of the wax paper to keep it still as I slowly move my way across the piece, never leaving the iron still for long, and checking as I go that the wax is adhering to the beads and the beads are expanding just enough to connect to each other. Areas that are small or stick out are very important here, because it's easy to either over-melt them or miss them, or even knock them out of place as the wax paper shifts. Avoid pressing down hard with the iron. The board you're using may warp from the heat, and it can bounce the beads out of place if you're not careful. Also, be mindful of the densely populated areas of beads like the center, because it can be easy to under-iron these areas on a large piece and miss single beads or even large sections of it. Because the heat is being dispersed over a larger area, these beads will melt slower than the ones near the edges. After I've ironed just enough to be confident the beads are holding together and won't easily slip out, I flip the panel over onto a flat surface and lift away the pegboard straight up. Even if some of the beads aren't connected to each other right now, the sticky wax paper is going to help hold them in place. Even though I'm leaving this large piece in panels to make it safer to ship, I'll attach this smaller piece since it won't change the dimensions too drastically. When paneling, I try to make sure the seams I leave aren't in areas the eye will be drawn to, like across a character's face. So sometimes I'm left with very small extra portions that don't make sense to leave on their own. I'll use this to show you how I iron seams. First, I'll start by making sure the edges I'll be connecting are attached to each other on one side, just enough to hold together, but still leaving opportunity for more easy melting and expanding. I'll line up the iron sides and carefully peel back the wax paper, just far enough to let the edge beads make contact with each other. I'll use the edge or very tip of the iron to melt those beads together just enough so they're connected. Then I'll flip the whole piece onto its other side. Because no ironing has been done on the front yet, the seam shouldn't be very noticeable, although you might have some beads that settle together at an angle instead of a parallel line. This usually isn't very noticeable in the final product though, so don't worry. For this side, instead of wax paper, I prefer to use parchment paper, which doesn't stick to the beads at all and after ironing won't leave a faint residue. When the beads have clearly fused together, remove the paper and then flip the panel back over to remove the wax paper. You'll want to go very slowly, peeling while pressing down on the paper like this to prevent the beads from peeling back with the wax. It also helps to prevent ripping. Though if you do end up with rippy bits, a neat tool for getting rid of them is a mini blowtorch lighter, which you can find at a lot of gas stations. If you do manage to pick one of those up, you can also use it to clear a bit of the residue that wax paper leaves, and to give your beads a glossier shine. Just be careful of burning or over melting. I don't recommend using a lighter for beads though, especially not without an adult if you're under 18. Displaying a paneled perler art piece is as simple as hanging a poster on the wall. Though you can obviously use any kind of nail or even adhesives to hang perler beads, removing them can be difficult or even destroy the art piece, so I recommend using clear thumbtacks for direct wall application. Perler beads themselves are very light, so you'll likely only need 1 or 2 tacks per piece depending on their size. Simply line up the edges of your piece one at a time and pin them anywhere directly through the bead holes to pin them in place. If your pieces aren't resting perfectly flat, the tacks can help hold them that way, and you can even use the slight lip of the gripping points to overlap seam lines and help hold them together. And whenever you want to move or adjust a piece, you can easily pull back on the thumbtack grip to remove it without having to worry about sticking or catching on the beads.